Hello. Today we will discuss loneliness. What does loneliness look like? In a few moments, I'll be joined by Fr Sean Sheehy to discuss whether Ireland is becoming a lonely place and why it now has the highest reported loneliness rate in Europe. We'll compare Ireland with Japan, a country where advanced loneliness has become so widespread it has turned into an industry. In Japan, people can pay for company, avail of cuddle cafés, they can rent a family, and even artificial forms of comfort. Is Ireland now on the cusp of becoming a very lonely place too? And how can a person be surrounded by people and still feel completely unseen and unheard? In Japan, loneliness has become so visible that it has created its own language. Words to describe people often young who withdraw from society and stay inside their bedrooms for months, years, or even decades. Words to describe when children refuse to go to school, not out of laziness, but out of fear from pressure, anxiety, or feeling unable to face the outside world. Words to describe people who vanish from their lives, leaving jobs, families, and identities behind as if they have disappeared into thin air. And then there are words to describe a relationless society, a world where people have fewer family ties, weaker community bonds, and no one certain to notice when they are gone. But is this only Japan's story, is what we'll be asking today with Fr Sean Sheehy. Or is Japan showing the rest of us what the future may look like? In Ireland, loneliness is quieter. We may not have cuddle cafes or rent a family services. Ireland's loneliness is often hidden behind humour, politeness, or sometimes people will say, sure, I'm grand. How many people are sitting alone tonight in Ireland? How many elderly neighbours are waiting for a phone call? How many young people are connected to everyone online, but close to nobody real in life? And how many people would have to disappear before we noticed they were gone? This is just not about Japan. It is not just about Ireland. It is about what happens when community weakens, when technology replaces contact, when people become private, efficient, and alone. But the real question is not whether loneliness exists. The real question is, when did we stop seeing each other? To discuss all this, we're going to talk to Fr Sean Sheehy. And hello, Fr Sean Sheehy.
Good evening.
And how are you? Today we're talking about loneliness, faith, mental health, and community. We'll explore what the Catholic Church can teach us about loneliness, what Ireland can learn from Japan, we see in the intro there, and whether modern society is losing the ability to rebuild that connection that's needed in communities. Father, what is the Catholic Church's view on loneliness? And when you mentioned Carl Jung, as we did when we were having a chat, how does his thinking help us understand the loneliness people are experiencing today? So there's two questions there.
Well, first of all, of course, the church doesn't have any official stand on loneliness as such, because loneliness is really a kind of a pathology. Actual God didn't create human beings to be lonely. I mean, go back to the book of Genesis, and he said to the man, he said, "It is not good to be alone." He said, "I'll make for you a suitable helpmate." So God created us actually to be social creatures and not to be lonely. But the church plays a huge, as Young pointed out, even though Young was certainly not Catholic, he really wouldn't be considered religious, although he appreciated the role of the spiritual in life. But the church actually is the antidote to loneliness, because the church herself provides what human beings need most desperately. And the first thing that human beings need, of course, is meaning. They need meaning. What am I all about? Who am I? They need purpose. They need a way actually of knowing that they can somehow overcome their limitations. And that's why, Young pointed out, he said, the church, he said, actually meets all the therapeutic needs, he said, of people, because it provides people with a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a way of salvation, an opportunity to confess their sins and receive forgiveness, a sacramental life that signifies that Jesus Christ is actually with them and they're not alone. And so God provides us with a way of knowing that he's here through our senses, because in the sacraments, they're visible signs of Jesus' presence and Jesus' activity in our lives. So the church actually is the antidote to loneliness, because as we see, there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely.
Okay. And then Carl Jung, you mentioned him. I think you said he was on page 27 of some book you have there.
Yeah, Christopsychology, yeah.
And what's his take on it, or views, or?
His take basically was that the church meets the basic needs of every human being to recognize that every human being is not a means to an end, but rather an end in himself or herself, and that every human being is different from all the rest of creation, because every human being has been created in God's image and likeness, and so the church highlights that.
Okay. So,
And loneliness, when people are lonely, they feel aimless, they're purposeless, they're anonymous. The church calls everybody to be recognized, and calls everybody actually to participate in community. And of course, community is essential for human growth, for human development.
okay. Carl Jung, I think was he a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst of some sort? It sounds like he was a Catholic.
Yeah. Actually, he was actually a student of Freud's, but he felt that Freud was too negative, and Freud believed that everything that happens to you is the result of your childhood. Whereas Jung actually, and also Freud, of course, wrote off religion and spirituality completely. He said it was a kind of a neurosis. So Jung disagreed with him, and Jung left him actually to highlight the notion of the collective unconscious and the effect of that on human beings, and the whole idea of archetypes, that people kind of follow, like motherhood, fatherhood, warrior, and all of those things that human beings espouse to. So Jung, yeah, and he appreciated and recognized the importance of the spiritual, the importance of the soul. That man is not just simply a physical body, but he is actually body soul composite body soul creation. So that's why Jung actually then recognized the Catholic Church, which of course focuses on primarily on feeding the soul, on spiritual growth, spiritual development, which of course, when a person grows spiritually, it also positively affects the physical growth, the mental growth, the emotional growth, the moral growth, the social growth, and all that translates, of course, also into economical growth.
Okay. At the intro there, we're talking about Japan's experience of loneliness, and it's become so visible that it's turned into an industry. What are your thoughts on that? What can we learn from Japan?
Well, I mean, I guess in a sense, it kind of turns the fact that it turned into an industry gave it a visibility that it probably mightn't have otherwise, because people are not always comfortable. Certainly here in this country, they're not comfortable saying, "I'm lonely." But they are lonely. They are lonely, and of course, the Irish people anyway tend to cover up a lot of stuff. They beat around the bush. They're not really upfront. I don't know. It's because they have a feeling or a sense that they won't be accepted if they're upfront, but they never really express themselves directly, which is aggravating, actually, to me. If something's going on in your life, say it, state it. State, because if you don't, then obviously you're not going to deal with it. they actually, I think the Japanese actually did people a favor. Maybe not in the right way, but a favor in the sense of recognizing this is a serious human problem. And so then from a purely secular standpoint, they addressed it. And so, as you said, they turned it into a business by supplying what they think people need in order to overcome their sense of loneliness, which of course is not really the answer at all, because when you hire a hugger, for 15 minutes, after that 15 minutes, you're kind of on your own again.
I couldn't, Father, I couldn't see cuddle cafés taking off in Ireland somehow, and this idea of rent a family where a fake mother and father comes in and you're part of their family, and for that hour or for that day you're part of their family, and then you have to pay them, and the family takes off. They're all actors. I couldn't see that taking off in Ireland, but perhaps
I could see the
it
I
might.
could see the government though for advocating that. You remember there a few years ago, they came up with this notion of a surrogate parent that they would send into families, to oversee how they were raising their children. I mean, it never came to
I
fruition.
never heard of it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I would be surprised if the government of this country advocated something like that, because it's an attempt on the part of a godless society to address a human problem,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work.
Can you tell me what's the difference between being alone and being lonely? We seem to get kind of confused the two there.
Yeah, very interesting. You know, to be alone actually is to be by oneself in the sense that there's no physical person near me. But being lonely, though, is quite different, because being lonely is not only is there no, it has nothing to do with whether a person is near me or not, but it has everything to do with the belief that there's no person who is emotionally connected to me or with whom I am emotionally connected. So a lonely person says, there's no one with me. A person who's alone says, there's no one near me. There's a big difference between the two in terms of the effect on the person. I mean, being alone is essential for human beings, and being alone is a choice. Loneliness is not a choice.
Yes.
We choose to be alone because we want solitude, or we want to pray, or we want to meditate, or we want to reflect, recollect, or whatever. Or we just need, as they say, we just need to chill, you know. But that's a choice. However, loneliness is not a choice. Loneliness is imposed on us by the society in which we live. Now, we're at fault ourselves as well, because oftentimes we're our own worst enemies, because we don't put the energy into making friends or allowing people to be friends with us. So sometimes we're the architects of our own loneliness, even though we don't freely choose it, but we allow it to happen.
Okay. Um, Japan has turned loneliness into an industry, while Ireland often hides loneliness behind humour and friendliness. Which form of loneliness is more dangerous because it's harder to see? And I suppose we know the
Well,
answer to
you know
that.
the old saying, Oliver. If you
Yeah.
don't, if you don't name it, you can't tame it.
Oh, wow,
So
very good. Yes.
So if you don't admit something, then you live in denial as if it's not there, when in actual fact it is there. And by denying it is not going to stop it. It's not going to prevent it. You're actually allowing it to take more and more and more control over you. And eventually all the facades and all the pretensions are all going to drop. And eventually what happens? People commit suicide, or people stay in their houses and they never come out, and all the rest of that stuff as well. So, and like I said earlier, there is a kind of a mentality in this country that somehow or other, if you admitted you're lonely, that people would look on you askance, or whatever. And maybe that reflects the fact that there's not much empathy in the country, in the culture. There's not much caring in the culture. There's not much community in the culture. And it also kind of reflects the fact too that the church, which is supposed to be formed in accord with the teaching of Jesus Christ, a loving, charitable, caring community, is not all that visible for people, or people don't know how to benefit from it. The same thing is true with faith. I mean, I met people, who have faith in the sense they go to mass every Sunday, but then when something happens to them, they don't seem to know how to put that faith into action, to put it to work for them. So people don't know maybe how to use what is around them to put it into action to help them as well. And I guess nobody wants to come across as weak. That's another fault, I think, in Irish society. But it's only through our weakness, actually, that we become strong. Remember St. Paul? He asked God 3 times to remove something that was really bothering him. And God said each time, he said, I will not remove it from you. He said, because it's in your weakness that you will experience my strength. But then that's where a person of faith, though, you see, differs from a person who has no faith. Because a person of faith there can overcome loneliness, because a person of faith knows that God loves me, God is with me, he never abandons me. So I know he cares for me. I know he's with me. So I'm not lonely.
Okay. Later on, I'll be talking to John Malone. We'll be talking about the leaders of the past. We'll be talking about Monsignor
Yes.
Oren. We'll be talking about Fergal Quinn, various people from different industries and culture. Are we creating the wrong kind of leaders who can manage systems but no longer know how to build a community? Is it leadership that might be the problem?
Well, it's not really leadership that's the problem. I mean, leadership can contribute to the problem. The problem really is a lack of community, a lack of a sense of community. Like when I was growing up, for example, and that's not to say that everything was perfect, because it wasn't, but there was a real sense of community, primarily because people were dependent on one another, and they didn't have to be invited to help; they just did it. I remember there was a woman just up the road from where I grew up, and her husband had died, was dead, and she was not very mobile. I remember my father, especially in the wintertime, every evening he'd go up there, he'd put down the fire for her, he'd sit down, he'd talk to her and whatnot. Most of that is gone from Irish society. And I think that has contributed to loneliness. I think the government then, you see, trying to bring everything into the large cities is making a huge mistake, because the large cities then, become kind of ghettos, where people don't feel safe anymore. They don't have the freedom of rural living, and they tend to stay with themselves more and more. I remember, the first time I went to New York, and I was traveling in the underground one evening, and I was amazed actually at all these people on the train, all buried in their newspapers. Nobody was interacting with anybody else. And it was all because that was the way they felt safe. They were afraid to interact because they were afraid that the other person might injure them or do something for them or whatnot. And I think that's part of our society today. I think leaders are doing little or nothing to foster community. As a matter of fact, I think that they're undermining it, by trying to shut down free speech, by all these rules and regulations that they're imposing in people. All of these things contribute to a non-free society. I think people feel unfree to express their loneliness.
I think yeah. I think you've hit
Ahead.
something very, very good there. When I was in Algeria last year, I was over there for a wedding, and I was there for 2 weeks. And what I noticed was how regulated Ireland was in compared to Algeria. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but the great sense of community, I actually said to the people I was with, this reminds me of the community that we had in Ireland in the 1980s. And I think what you hit on
Mm-hmm.
there is very, very, very important. That regulation, when you become a very regulated society, it kind of cuts in on the community and it diminishes the community.
Which actually Japan is, isn't it?
It's very regulated, yes.
Yes.
You see, so yes, it's a very good point.
And so, but you see, here to me, this to me is where the church should make all the difference, because the church is a countercultural, has a countercultural focus. It blesses the good things in the culture, but it challenges and condemns and tries to change the bad things in the culture. But in Ireland, the voice of the church is muted, and so now people are really left to their own devices.
Yeah, I
They're like
suppose.
the people. They're like the people in the Old Testament who said, all the prophets are gone, and we have nobody now to relate God's message to us, or to tell us what to do, or where we're headed, or whatever. So people are isolated, for various reasons, left to themselves, and as a result, all they face then are their own limitations. And when we face our own limitations, it can lead to a kind of a sense of despair. Certainly leads to a sense of loneliness.
Okay. I suppose, look, when you look at the pubs, the pubs was kind of in Ireland were a community hub, where people met on a regular basis and got seriously drunk, some of them. But and that's gone now, and that's regulation. There's
It
an
is
example.
regulation.
Okay, but could we
Yes.
say that regulation damaged the church? Could you say that?
Well, I wouldn't say that, because the purpose of the rules of the church are actually to bring people closer to Christ if they're understood properly. The rules of the church are not meant to limit people in terms of their growth as human beings. I mean, here we have the Ten Commandments, for example. The Ten Commandments actually are means that when we observe them, we're actually participating in the love of God for us. When I put God first, when I worship Him, when I respect His name and so on, when I honor my father and mother, when I respect life, when I respect the proper use of sexuality, when I respect another person's property, when I respect the truth, when I'm happy, when somebody else is successful, when somebody else has a good relationship, they're all conducive actually to developing humanity. But I was thinking, today the church celebrates the Feast of the Holy Trinity. God has revealed Himself as a community of persons, and it's within the community of persons that people experience love. And that's why God revealed Himself as love, precisely because He is a community. But I'm thinking, like I was saying to the people at Holy Mass this morning, I said, you know that in this country, the vast majority of the people do not worship God today. So if they don't worship God today, they're worshiping something else. And whatever else they worship is a false God. And when you worship a false God, you're worshiping someone who's making false promises and who can't deliver. Only the true God, actually, who is a community of persons, can enable people to build community. And if the true God is not central in a person's life, in a country's life, then that person is doomed to rely on themselves. And you know the old saying about court, and when you defend yourself in court, you have a fool for a client.
Okay, very good.
And so when we try to save ourselves, we have a fool for a savior. Because one of the most important things in community is the ability to forgive, the ability to reconcile, the ability to love, the ability to acknowledge one another's existence, the ability to affirm one another, to encourage one another, the ability to be affectionate towards one another. All those things are impossible without God, and without those things, loneliness is inevitable.
You mentioned something there, actually, it's very, very important. Forgiveness. Like, a lot of us carry our burdens nowadays because we're not religious and we hold
Mm.
our grudges. And of course, that would be one big divisional thing in society, that if you fall out with one fellow and you can't forgive him, that perhaps then when you fall out with one, you fall out with 10. You fall out with his
Very
friends
true.
also.
That's right. And when you fall out with somebody and you don't forgive them, then you're actually allowing that person to control your emotional life.
Wow.
You know, because forgiveness frees you. so that you can move on with your life. A lack of forgiveness imprisons you, so that you're allowing what this person did to you to control your thoughts, and what controls your thoughts controls your emotions, and what controls you, and your emotions then determine how you act. So it's all integrated, you see. And
it's a very good point.
and it's sad because it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. But it
So
can't. We can't resolve it though without God, because, as I said, God has created us in His image and likeness, and because He's a community, He's created us to be a community. But we can be a community on our own because we can't forgive in our own. You know yourself the old saying: "To err is human, but to forgive is divine." So we can only forgive through the grace of God. So if we don't have God in our lives, then we can't forgive. Even if we want to, we can't, because forgiveness is a divine act,
yeah, and
and an act of love.
it's something that I can really relate to because I was managing a pub 25 years ago, and I remember this was a small community pub, and if one person fell out with a family, the entire family, if they didn't,
Yeah,
would stay
yeah,
out of the pub. And then because that family stayed out of the pub, 10 more from another family, the Murphys or something, would stay out. Okay. Now you've lost because of one sin and lack of
yeah,
forgiveness. There's 20
yes,
people gone missing.
yes, absolutely. And as if somehow or other that was the answer to the problem, which which only magnifies the problem.
And it magnifies the problem. But it goes back to leaders. Obviously, this person that causes this is some kind of leader that he has such power that 20 people will stay away. And I'm going into my next videos with John Malone. We'll be talking about leadership, I suppose. And I just thought to myself, at the top of the pyramid, it's the leaders of all areas of life have a
Yes,
responsibility to bring about a community atmosphere, something that's communal. And when they make decisions, they need to ask themselves not how much is in the bank, but
right.
how can we build a community?
I think to me, the sign of a true leader is a person who makes it his or her business to facilitate the discernment, development, and deployment of the gifts of all his or her followers,
Yes.
to help each one discern his or her gifts, to help develop them and deploy them. Because then you're actually facilitating people to be at their best. And you're at your best actually when you're using your gifts. And when you're using your gifts, for the good of others and the society, you're also doing God's will as well.
Very nice.
And
And
that's how, and because no leader, as you know yourself, no leader has all the gifts. And and God distribute gifts to different people, different gifts to different people, but we all need each other's gifts. And actually, the more a person is not helped to discern his gifts, the more impoverished society becomes,
yes,
because society needs the gifts of every member in order to be at its best. And
right.
we shouldn't be satisfied with a good society, or trying to make a better society. But we should be striving to be the best society we can be. And the best society is the society that facilitates the use of the gifts of every one of its members, regardless of the capacity or incapacity of their bodies, because every human being has a gift. Every human being.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, people who communicate a lot. My father would be a great skilled communicator. I call him
Mm-hmm.
the messenger in society because he talks to a lot of people, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And I suppose there's without the community, there's a lack of messengers. There's a lot of lack of talking to each other. You mentioned earlier on, we touched on it, the AAA of mental health. Can we just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, the AAA of mental health has always been very important, to me in terms of working with people, because I remember talking to a woman there, oh, I think it was last year. She said she was in Cork City one day and she was walking down the street and she came across this man who was sitting down there, with his bundles beside him. And so she stopped and told him hello and, how are you? Are you homeless? How long have you been on the streets and all the rest of that stuff? And she also gave him something as well, some coins that she had. But he said to her, he said, "Do you know?" He said that in a long period of time, he said, "You're the first person that recognized my existence." So acknowledging a person's existence is saying, you matter, you matter. Yeah, I recognize you. You're created by God. You deserve to be respected. You actually are a gift from God to others. You're a blessing from God. God creates you to be a blessing. And then the person feels acknowledged. You know yourself what it's like, when you try to talk to somebody and they ignore you. They're not acknowledging your existence. And you know how that feels, it doesn't feel very, very comforting, does it? So that's the first thing. I acknowledge your existence. I recognize that you exist, and I'm glad that you exist, and I respect that existence. I thank God. Affirmation is all about encouragement. Encouraging a person to achieve his or her goals. Encouraging a person, especially when they fail, that look, you can get up again, you can move on again, you can learn from your failure, and so encouragement is key. And I think we live in a society, especially our society, that's not very encouraging because there's a high level of begrudgery in our society. It's almost like if you do well, then I become jealous of you, or I try to pull you down. But, oh, well, I know Oliver. I know his father. He was this bad. So it's this focus on tearing somebody down rather than building somebody up. So affirmation is crucial. Feel recognize that I'm important to somebody and that somebody cares about me and that I can talk to somebody when I need. So I call those a triple A of mental health because when you meet somebody who is down, when you meet a lonely person, one or more of those is missing. They don't feel acknowledged, they don't feel affirmed, and they don't feel that anybody really cares. They don't sense any affection from anybody. So that's why I call them. The AAA. What's the AAA one time? I think it was. Was it was it, I think it was insurance in America or something. But I call this the AAA of mental health because I think those three things are essential for a person to be mentally and emotionally healthy.
But Father, is it not better to have a community of begrudgery than no community at all? Because I mean, if you go back to when we had a community,
No,
the begrudgery was there at the time anyway.
yeah, it was begrudgery, but you see, like when I was growing up, in one sense, there was no need for begrudgery because everybody was in the same boat pretty much. You
Okay.
know, nobody really had very much, and they appreciate what they did have. But no, it's the very same as saying a bad relationship is better than no relationship. No, that's not true,
Okay.
because a bad relationship will pull you down, pull you down. When a society suffers from begrudgery, then people actually are afraid to go forward in case they might be seen as ambitious or you know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
You
yes,
know, they might be better, and that holds people back.
yes, absolutely.
And I call it, false humility here. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't want to overreach myself. I don't want to, go beyond my means. I don't want to act like I'm better than anybody else, even though it has nothing to do with that. So it
I
holds
funny
people back.
funny you should say that. I see that a lot when I see GAA players talking themselves down about being their play on the pitch.
Yes, false humility.
Yes, there you go. Thank you very much. This was a very interesting conversation about
Thank
loneliness,
you.
and I hope that Ireland doesn't follow. I think it would be a very sad day to go into a small town in Ireland and see a cuddle cafe or an
Yes,
or
yes.
rent a family. Or I hope we don't go down road, and we really do. I'll be covering it, as I say, in the next video with John, which is part of this segment. The importance of good leaders and past leaders, and that. Do you want
Very
to
good.
just give us your last words there? And
I think loneliness is a sign that we don't think that anybody cares. And I think the antidote to loneliness is Christianity, is knowing that I don't care whether somebody loves me or not, because I know I'm loved, because I know God, and I know God loves me. Even when I don't love him, he still loves me. I know God cares about me. I know God affirms me. I know God is affectionate towards me. I know God acknowledges me. And that's the foundation for everything. And that's because I say to people, I said, look, what I have, because of the faith that I have, you can have too, if you believe in God, if you make God the center of your life. So that's what I'd just like to finish with.
very good. If you want to give me your blessing there, Father.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord let his face shine upon you. May he be gracious to you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you, Oliver.
Thank you, Father. Good night.
All the listeners.
Thank you. Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
So, following on from Father Sheehy, I want to discuss with you Irish leaders who brought communities together. It seems like that the problem of developing loneliness in Ireland is the leadership at the very top in all the different organizations, whether it be housing, whether it be technology. You remember a time when we had great leaders. We had Monsignor Horan, we had Daniel O'Connell, we had Fergal Quinn. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So maybe we'll start off with Monsignor James Horan.
Yes, he was a man with a vision. He was the parish priest of Knock, and the Knock shrine, the miracle, and he he wanted to make it more widely available, because people that would be travelling to Knock would have to come to Shannon or Dublin and then drive down, and he wanted an airport. And he didn't have much support. It was his own vision and all the rest of it. And um, the but he got the airport thanks to Charlie Haughey, the leader of Fianna Fáil. The leader of Fine Gael at the time wouldn't touch it. And the same way as they wouldn't touch Shannon Airport either when it was being built, talking about being in an estuary and the business of not being in a bog or a mountainy place that's nearly impossible. And but Charlie saw the potential, and Charlie's family lived in Castlebar for some years when he was young. So he had an affinity with Mayo, and he had vision as well, like Father, like Monsignor Horn, and he provided the funds. And the airport was built and turned out to be a success, because to get over 1 million visitors a year, and that will expand as time goes on, because the Cardinal Timothy Dolan has come there twice or three times with plane loads of people from the United States of Irish descent, and people that might be also interested in Knock, because it's now recognised as a Marian shrine. And so, therefore, it has got recognition like Lourdes or any of these other places. But the beauty of Knock is that you can conduct your affairs and speak. The people there are speaking the same as I'm speaking to you. You go to other countries and you've got a language problem. You don't have the sort of people around that you can sort of ask questions, whereas in Knock you have. And then you've a lovely hinterland there. And Knock comprises quite a number of acres, and there's beautiful places outside stations at the cross and everything. So Monsignor Horn had a vision.
Very good. And of course, we move on to Fergal Quinn.
Yeah, he also had a vision, and he started his first supermarket in Sutton, which was originally it was originally what would I call it, a cinema, because I went to cinema, I went to films there when I was young and hope, and that's where he opened his place, and thanks be to God, he did a great job, and he had an office in Denmark Street, and I had deals with him, and I worked for a company called Pet Foods, Spot Limited Pet Foods, and it was a brand, one of the brand leaders. And so he sold it a bit below cost, and it caused problems. But anyway, he was very good, and he also opened other super stores, and he was very hands on with the people. And Sutton, he used to help at the checkouts to wrap bags and greet people and so on and so forth. He was a very down to earth sort of a person. And of course, his father was also down to earth. He was from Newry, his father, and he started a sort of self service pay and take, it was called. And they were quite successful. I knew some of them at the time, pay and take. And so he was reared in that environment. That his father was a Farsi man, and so Craig was brought up that way, and so he was very good, and he did very well.
Yeah, he had a very personal touch with the customers, and he made them feel like a community, I think.
He did. That's what he did, and he had good quality products, and it was the staff was very friendly as well. So he did everything right.
Absolutely. And of course, we have Thomas Davis, if you remember the song A Nation Once Again.
That's right. Yes, Thomas Davis. He wrote the Nation newspaper, and in 1861 or something like that. And he was a Protestant, but he wanted to bring people together, irrespective of their religious background, and to give them to bring them together and to give them a hope, because they didn't have much hope. We were under the British establishment at the time, and they didn't treat the country in a proper fashion. There was restrictions and all the rest of it, and we just barely got our practicing the Catholic faith. Oh yeah, we wanted that there now. So he did that in 1861. So are you going on to Daniel O'Connell?
Daniel O'Connell, yes, if you
Daniel
want to go to
O'Connell.
him next, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, he as far as I'm concerned, one of the best Irishmen in the country for all time, because he went peaceful about it to start to get uh, Irish people to be able to practice their Catholic faith without having to go into get mass and mass rocks and all the rest of it, and their churches destroyed that had been destroyed during the Reformation. So he did it peacefully. He had monster meetings all over the country, and he had a hard time from the British, I can tell you. But he succeeded in getting that we could practice our Catholic faith in 1829, and then we had to start building churches. But we were helped by our brothers and sisters in the United States that had prospered somewhat, and that were able to help us in that, because people were very poor at those times. Don't forget, shortly after 1829 and 1845, 1 million of our brothers and sisters died of starvation when the potato crop failed, because that's what they were just living on, potatoes. They had no money for anything else. But Daniel O'Connell was a great visionary, and to my way of thinking, he should be going on for sainthood.
Okay. You mentioned earlier on Blessed Edmund Ignatius Rice.
That's right. He was a businessman and from a well-to-do family in Waterford, but he had a vision to help people get an education, because education was not available only to wealthy people. And most Irish people were poor, quite frankly, poor. And they didn't have much of this world's goods. But the education was the key to prosperity. And he started the Presentation Brothers, and they called him something else, but they expanded and gave education to people, poor people. And even my father was a policeman, but his wages were poor. They only had bicycles. There was wealth was you just had enough to live on by way of food and that, but wealth was scarce. But once you had the Presentation Brothers and the Christian Brothers, I don't know if they were if Edmund. Blessed Edmund Royce, now he would be edified. Um, Edmund Ignatius Royce, if he helped to start the Christian Brothers as well, because they did great. They gave a great education to poor people, and suddenly were able to get good jobs.
That's it. John Hume, who created the conditions for peace in Northern Ireland.
He did, and he was from Derry, and he was reputed to have started a credit union in the north, but he started in Derry. But he had vision. That's what he had, and they had a civil rights march from wherever it was to Derry, and they were attacked with stones and rocks by the extreme Protestants who had hatred for Catholics because of the way that area was administered by the British. There's always division wherever they are. There's division, and John Hume was attacked by B specials, but it went worldwide, and it backfired. On where suddenly the United States and other countries saw what was happening in the north, and John Hume's reputation grew. He became an Assembly MP in the North. He became an MP in the British Parliament, and he became a an European member of Parliament. And he travelled worldwide, and he was honoured in more countries than nearly anyone that I know of, because of his lovely, simple Catholic faith, and the way he brought peace in a peaceful manner to Northern Ireland. He was also aided and abetted by Seamus Malone from Derry. He was a great man. Austin Curry as well. He occupied houses were in Dungannon, where there was 90% Catholic, was given to single Protestants when Catholic families couldn't get a social house, or whatever you call it. So it brought attention to it. And then you had Paddy Devlin in Belfast. He was another SDLP, and Ivan Cooper in Derry. It was a Protestant, but he was an SDL, and they were great men. They brought sanity to that area. And it's a shame to see that the leadership of that party, the the SDLP, is now pro-abortion and all that. John Hume would be turning in his grave.
Yes, and we were talking earlier on about Nano Nagel.
Yeah, she was a great lady, a well-to-do lady. I think in County Cork somewhere. I think I know I was in the place. There's a place dedicated to her. I was in it years ago. I can't figure out what part it's in, but it was in it. And she was another visionary. She started an organisation to help poor children in Cork, and it become the Presentation Sisters. And as a matter of fact, they were the presentation sisters were all over the place. And in Carrick and Shannon, we had the presentation brothers that had been started by blessed Edmund Ignatius Rice from Waterford. And there was Christian Brothers in Kells, and there was a picture, and they had an oratory, and I used to visit it, and they had a picture, a very good picture of blessed Edmund Ignatius Rice, and I and things about him and that, and I used to look at it. It was very good.
Very good. I think that we were talking earlier on about like even in leaders in housing years ago in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if somebody built a housing estate, the green areas, you can go around Dublin, you can see them, there's vast green areas for communities. It's built around the whole community, whereas now it's a case of stack 'em high with no green area.
That's right, yeah. Well, you had McInerney's were built lovely 3 bedroom houses, nice solid houses, and with a garage attached to it. People didn't have cars, but at least if they did wind up with a car, they had a garage, and of course they could expand that. And there were beautiful houses, McInerney's. They were from Ennis originally, and they built lovely houses, and there was other ones as well, and they were very social conscious. It was a very good time, and the government at that time, there was people living in tenements in Dublin in very poor conditions with only one toilet for a whole heap of families, and they were housed in Ballyfermot and Crumlin and Drimna and Cabra and these places, and they had a 3 bedrooms, and they had a garden front and back.
So we can see, John, that the pubs have been decimated, the church has been decimated. All this contributes to loneliness.
It is. It does. The pub wasn't a place where to go in and get drunk. It was a social place where people could smoke a pipe, because I often remember, as a matter of fact, there used to be comedies about that and smoking the pipe. And I remember even when I was younger, women used to smoke a kind of a clay pipe, a roundy thing. And so there was that, like, so there was that camaraderie, and they weren't looked down on or anything like that. So, and they used to have in the snug in the pub, they used to have maybe a glass of Guinness, which they couldn't have, and they weren't going into the main part. And there wasn't segregation, which the crowd used these expressions in the nowadays, which was never heard tell of in my time, and but there was that kind of respect, and whatever it is that everybody had. And also women were very well dressed them times, they were very dressed very respectably, and they mightn't have had much, but they had good clothes, and they often in church they'd wear a scarf or a hat or something, out of respect. And it was, and everybody went up to the altar to receive Holy Communion, kneeling at the altar, attended by a priest, and he'd have a paten with an altar server, because I was under the chin of the communicant to save the sacred host. But all that changed, and all these changes in the church, in the way towns had town councils and all the rest of it, and a lot of them was done away with. So they had no representatives to sort of get things done for the town. All they were done away with. So the sort of the community structures were gradually dismantled. And don't forget, post offices started being closed, and the banks in King's Court, which has a couple of thousand people working in Kingspan and other places, they haven't got a bank. The last bank pulled out, so services are being withdrawn from towns, and so what's the use of that? And I know in Listowel, which is a lovely town, a big town, suddenly their postmen is not employed in the post office.
That's
We
right.
have our own postman here in a small town. I believe they're coming from somewhere else. So the services and the community is being interfered with to its detriment.
There you go. Look, we can only hope for the best, and I suppose that there's a few takes there for all the leaders, young leaders and older leaders in the country. You know
We
that,
focus on the community in a proper way and provide the services and open post offices open and stop closing them.
and I suppose,
I
look,
don't know what the idea. Huh?
I suppose, look as well. They can learn from some of the leaders that we just mentioned.
They were far seeing and they gave hope when it was a scarce commodity. Michael Davitt, did we mention him about the land league?
We didn't actually. I don't think so. No.
Oh, well, he was a very important man. He's buried in the little village in Mayo. I was in it and in the church and saw his grave and all. He was far seeing the land league because we're landlords and absentee landlords and charging rents exorbitant for very poor land. So farmers got their rights. They got land. I remember in Boyle, Sir Cecil King Harmon, he was a big, he owned 60,000 acres. But that was all given to farmers. And so that all disappeared. He wasn't able to hold on the land league or the land, whatever they called it. It was taken from them, and the tax was such that they had to get rid of it. And so people were able to get land and have farms and proper farms. So some of them have very big farms, and they're gone the wrong way there. But Charlie Haughey was very helpful to farmers as well in the west of Ireland that were nearly starving, and he gave them some social welfare help, and it kind of kept them going. He doesn't get credit for a lot of the good things that he did.
So there we go. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, Oliver.